Hello and welcome everyone to another edition of our podcast for our book, Making Connections, a handbook for effective formal mentoring programs in academia. I am here today with Jennifer Gruey and Harrison Kleiner, who are the authors of Chapter 16, our case study, our fourth case study that focuses on first year experiences. So the case study is called the Connections Program, integrating mentoring into the first year experience. I am really excited about this particular case study because of the population that it's serving. So I'm looking forward to talking with our authors more about that. A little bit about our authors. Jennifer Gruey is an assistant professor with the Department of Psychology at Utah State University and has taught thousands of undergraduate students through the many psychology courses for their undergraduate psychology program, and is the director of Connections, this first year experience program that we're going to talk about today, and the co-director of their psychology undergraduate department or undergraduate program. And Harrison Kleiner is also an associate professor of philosophy and associate vice provost for general education and director of the liberal arts program at Utah State University. Harrison teaches across curriculum in philosophy at Utah State and leads a lot of institutional efforts in curricular and assessment reform in the first year experience and general education, and consults regionally. So I think we have got ourselves two incredible experts on the first year experience. So hello and welcome, Jennifer and Harrison.
Thank you for having us here.
Yep,
We're
great
excited
to be here.
Terrific. Well, I would love for you to share what inspired the work that you all do in mentoring, and specifically the Connections program.
Yeah, so it's a pretty easy answer to that. What inspired us was a commitment to student success. The Connections program is really Utah State University's kind of flagship retention program. And so a place where we really focus on academic student success. That was true of the Connections program even before we added the mentoring component. It's all about helping students be successful in college, understand the value of college, and help them better navigate their way through college to be successful. So we're a group. The program is run by a group of people who are constantly tinkering and improving to try to help serve our students better. So in some ways, our inspiration was pretty simple. It's a program that's totally dedicated to student success.
I think Harrison mentioned that before we added our mentorship program, it was still a great program. One reason why we decided to add that mentorship program, though, is we saw students really make these great relationships with their instructors, and they would have these really great relationships for a few days and into the semester, just a few weeks into the semester, and then these instructors kind of said bye, and these students said bye, and we thought, oh, that's kind of unfortunate, because maybe there's something more to this, and that we can really build upon this and extend it into a full year-long mentoring program.
Yeah, that's great. One of the things I noted as I was reading through your case study was that commitment that you all have to sort of learning, reevaluating, assessing, and changing and improving, that sort of constant improvement of the program, which is such a key part of any program. But I want to hone in, Jennifer, on what you're talking about, this instructor mentor. You use that term quite a bit throughout your case study. And so can you talk more about this instructor mentor, how you all are defining mentoring, and really what are those three core values that you've talked about are key to ensuring that your instructor mentors are really aligned with your goals?
Yeah, I think I tried to use that particular term, that instructor mentor, pretty consistently, because I wanted to differentiate between other types of mentoring relationships. The one between the student and the instructor is really a valuable one, in that that instructor has a lot of experience and knowledge that really can help guide that student's experience and hopefully help them to have a successful experience of it and in the first year at our institution. The really we looked into the literature, and there was a lot of different themes that came out in terms of defining mentorship, and we really honed in on kind of 3 overarching concepts that were related to that definition of mentorship. And it was the building a relationship. That's key. We can't do any of the other components of that mentoring in this particular program. We talk about that if in the chapter, if that is not if that's not established, that's not a good relationship. And then from there, we train our instructors to work on guiding students, and guiding can look like a lot of different things. Sometimes it is kind of introducing different knowledge and resources. And then other times it's having a conversation and an open and honest conversation with that student. And then the last component of it is really this brokering idea, that we wanted instructors to be able to broker students to the resources on campus. We have an abundance of student resources available on our campus, which I'm sure a lot of other campuses have that experience. And what happened, we noticed before, is a lot of these students weren't getting to the resources. Instructors would tell them about those resources, but then there was never any follow through. And so this idea of using that mentoring relationship to have students actually get in and utilize a resource that is going to be really beneficial for them was key to our particular program.
Yeah, to add to that a bit, in some cases before this mentoring program, we had faculty in classes pointing students to these resources. But one benefit of this program is our faculty themselves are a lot more aware of the resources that we have on campus, because they're being asked to broker students, at least the ones who are teaching connections. Because very often what was happening with these students who are maybe experiencing some kind of struggle is that they would get an email from an office on campus. And if we're honest, sometimes these offices don't have the most appealing names. If you think about the sort of struggling student gets an email from the Office of Retention and Completion, it's pretty easy for that to kind of feel like I'm getting called to the principal's office. I'm in trouble. It's this nameless, faceless office with kind of an intimidating sounding bureaucratic name. So we had tremendous resources available for campus, but there were sort of 2 challenges, I think. One, connecting students with those resources in a just-in-time way. And then second, having the students actually respond to the outreach that we were doing from those offices. And so our insight was, well, wait a minute, as Jen said at the beginning, if we've already done all this work to build a relationship with a faculty member, well, let's leverage that. So now they're not getting an email from a nameless, faceless, slightly scary sounding office. They're getting an email from a faculty member who they know cares about them. And that faculty member is saying, hey, here's a great resource. Let me connect you with that over there. And it's a big difference.
And let's be honest, a lot of the times those emails would get deleted because students would look at them. I mean, they're almost like, from a student's point of view, it was like spam. And so they just delete it and never get the resources they needed.
I wanted to highlight one other thing at the start of Jen's previous answer is why instructor mentor. Our program, we actually also have peer mentors in our program. So it's not that there's only one kind of mentoring, of course, that's valuable, but we focused on the instructor mentor because we know this from some literature, and we also just know this anecdotally. Students don't stay in college because you got a great football team. Students don't stay in college because they're having fun, because you can have fun not as a college student. The college experience for students really rises and falls with the meaningfulness of their academic experience. And because of that, having a relationship with a faculty member, there's lots of other important relationships that students have at the university with advisors, with financial aid counselors. And I'm not invalidating or discounting the value of those other relationships. But there is a sense in which the relationship between a student and a faculty member is, the fundamental relationship of the university. And all of the other relationships and offices and programs and all the other things that we do really are in the service of the academic mission, which means in the service of the relationship between students and faculty. So we emphasize the instructor mentor because we really wanted these students to have a relationship with a faculty member. And we have some anecdotal, stories from our director of retention and completion. And she puts it this way, and it's always stuck with me. When she's talking to a student who's going to leave the university, if that student is not having a meaningful academic experience and does not know a faculty member, the university can move mountains to try to get them to stay, and they won't. If that struggling student is having a meaningful academic experience and does know a faculty member, they'll move mountains to try to stay. And so, creating an opportunity where every incoming freshman at our residential campuses that wants to have a relationship with a faculty member in their first year, they have one, is a really extraordinary thing when you think about, what that means for the student sense of academic belonging and why they're here. So anyway, I wanted to highlight why we really wanted to focus on the instructor-mentor relationship here.
No, I appreciate that. And I appreciate that because also I think that is really clear of how you started about where y'all's inspiration is in that student experience, and the incredible scale at which you all are doing this program is quite significant. And so my question is, as you were just talking about this instructor mentor, and as folks read through the chapter in the case study, they will see that instructor mentor has a critical role and has a multifunctional purpose. And so if you could talk a little bit about the training and the selection process, because part of what makes for a great mentoring relationship is a prepared mentor, right? So what goes into your process in identifying mentors and ensuring they are skilled up to do the work that you want them to do that's so critical for student retention?
So we start a process of recruitment pretty early on with our instructors, and we want to make sure that before they apply for the program, they have a good idea of what they're getting into. So we want to make sure in our recruitment process that we have that all clearly outlined, and we're kind of practicing what we preach, and that open communication and good communication. And so the instructors have a good idea of what they're signing up for. And we do have a competitive process in our hiring process. We have an application. It includes some questions that help us to kind of start to sort those applications into those instructors that are maybe going to be a bit more student focused and behind these kind of big ideas behind the whole idea of higher education. And then we have a hiring committee. We select the best of the best, in my opinion. I think the instructors that we get that apply for this kind of program are people that want to work with students.
Yeah.
I hear that all the time, that there's instructors that will sometimes come into our program that say things like, I only get to work with graduate students. My graduate students are great, but I never get to work with these undergraduate students. Or an instructor like me that teaches really, really large general education courses, and I teach hundreds of students, and it's a great opportunity to have a small class and really get to know these students. And so I think we get some of those just really student-focused, student-centered instructors as in our program. And then we do quite a bit of training. And what we found is that the training definitely helps support our outcomes in terms of our program, but it's also great training just as a teacher in higher education. It's some wonderful information and resources that can help them not only teach within our program, but help them teach their own classes and mentor their own students in their own individual discipline areas. So, and we do training. We do it in the fall, some optional things throughout the spring, the summer, and then and then that process kind of repeats itself from year to year.
Yeah, the cascading effects are really valuable here, and that those kinds of things are harder to measure, but faculty that teach in our program end up being different faculty members in different parts of their job. I want to highlight something that Jen said too. This isn't to diminish the importance of training and giving our instructor mentors tools to be effective mentors, but we hire for values. There's certain things you can't train, you know, and so now look, there's some faculty who, you know, wouldn't be a good fit to be an instructor mentor for first-year students, and that's fine. I'm sure they're contributing to the institution in other ways, right? And there's lots of things for lots of different people with different skills to do. So not everybody has to have, you know, a real value for helping first year and especially kind of first gen and right students. That's fine, but we need to hire the ones that do want to. So happily, we're really clear, as Jen said, about what the program is, what it's for, what its values are. So we tend to get, it's already a self-selecting group who's applied, you know, to teach for it. And so, and then for the most part, you're then happily training a willing and eager audience, right? So lots of times when you go to, you know, when we go to first year experience conferences and the rest of it, I hear lots of questions about how do you get faculty buy-in? Well, you only have to like wrestle with the problem of faculty buy-in if you have an unwilling, you know, group of faculty. You're trying to foist something on them that they don't really want to do. We've managed to avoid that, right? We're not foisting anything on anybody. It's a self-selecting audience. I will say this. I think one other important piece. This is kind of more recruitment rather than hiring and training, but that has been helpful. A helpful tidbit maybe for people that are listening. We've had really clear communication from our provost office to the faculty that participating in this program counts toward the teaching part of their role when it comes to promotion and tenure. So that's been helpful, right, for faculty to know this isn't sort of service that isn't going to count for very much, right, when it comes to promotion and tenure decisions. So we've really signaled from the top that we value this program as important to the teaching mission of the institution, rather than thinking of sometimes mentoring can be counted as teaching, sometimes it's kind of service. That I think has been helpful for so those that have the value and they want to do it, but they also want to make sure it sort of makes sense for them professionally as they're moving towards promotion and tenure. I think that's been important.
I agree.
Yeah, that level of buy-in from your leadership is so key, right? To the success of programs when we're trying to do it, and that's right, that alignment of the program goals with the organizational goals. And I know in your chapter you have highlighted the impact. So can you share with us what the positive impact of the mentoring program has been?
So I'll let maybe Harrison, you can talk about some of our kind of our data, but
yeah,
just briefly, I'll mention that we have a lot of anecdotal evidence as well. And I do think it's important. I mean, it's not the only thing we look at. And in terms of directing our program, we definitely look at some of that, you know, the big data in determining where we're going and what we need to kind of redo and focus on. But I think the anecdotal stuff that we hear about all the time is incredibly powerful. And both coming from students and instructors, how beneficial this program has been, how much it has helped students and helped support students. And those are the feel-good stories. You know, those are the stories we hear and we're like, yes, this is why I'm doing my job, and this is so great. Anyway, I just wanted to highlight that, Rob.
No, education is a relationship business. And so those anecdotes aren't mere anecdotes. They are the thing. You know, that experience of the student who faced a challenge, had somebody that they trusted, that they knew that they cared about them, those anecdotes, they're never mere anecdotes. In our case study, we actually highlight the data that we think for people who are interested in a program like this is the most important data from the point of view of, persuading your administration that this is an investment that's going to have a return. Because lots of times up at central administration, they're going to want ROI. And the return on investment is the easiest way to think that through is retention. So that's the data that we share within the case study itself. And it's really pretty extraordinary. Now, to begin with, we had already an extremely effective connections program without the mentoring. But comparing where we had 7% gaps in retention from people who took connections as opposed to those who didn't. But then when we compare connections without mentoring to connections with mentoring, now we're measuring first to second year retention, because at Utah State University, that's where we tend to lose most of our students, is from year 1 to year 2. If we can get them to step foot back on campus fall of their second year, there's a bit of attrition from year 2 to 3, 3 to 4, but it's much, much lower. And I think, institutions would need to look at their own data. When are we losing students? If it's from year 2 to year 3, well, you target this in a different way. For us, it's year 1 to 2. At first, we thought about having a sophomore experience, but then we realized, well, that's going to have to be a heck of a draw to get students to come back for that, right? And that's when, this is building on a point that Jen made earlier, wait a minute, we're building this relationship with faculty and connections for the first few days, few weeks of the semester, then we're just letting it die on the vine. Why aren't we leveraging that? Because the trick is getting students to enroll for the fall, which is happening spring of their first year. So there's been incredible improvement. So fall of 2020 was our first year with Connections mentoring, and our Connections cohort retention went from 75.8% up to 78.1%. And something I want to highlight here, though, that was in the fall of 2020. So this is the COVID year, when nationally retention rates were in a nosedive. So not only did we mitigate the decline in retention that that was experienced all over the country. There's a million articles in the Chronicle about this if you want to go find the data and the rest of it. Not only did we mitigate what would have been an anticipated decline, we actually still saw an increase in our retention rate as compared to previous iterations of Connections that did not have mentoring. And then as we're improving and refining the following year, that number ticked up, and we expect that number to continue ticking up. I'd share one other bit of data that we don't have in the case study, but just on the kind of effectiveness of these things. So the thing I'm going to mention here is a bit more transactional, getting students to register for spring semester, right? Or in the spring, registering for fall semester. We had, because of COVID in the fall of 2020, students who were really slow registering. I think there were a lot of students wondering, do I really want to stick with this? Things are on Zoom, all of these kinds of questions that all across the country students were asking. And the university was engaging with these students, trying to get them to register with relatively little success. Then we turned to the Connections mentors and said, hey, Connections mentors, reach out to your students and encourage them to register for next semester. Almost immediately, a dramatic uptick. And it's just a case study of the principle that we had. When someone that a student knows and who they know cares about them reaches out to them and encourages them to do something, or helps them see through a transactional thing, or helps them when they're facing a challenge, when they reach out to the student, it's much more effective than when a nameless, faceless office on campus kind of spams them with reminders.
Yeah, I think your case study and what you all have shared here today is such a testimony to honing in on relationships and caring and bringing that personal high touch experience to that first year experience, because it can make such a difference for myself as somebody who went to undergraduate school a very long time ago, a different century, who was a benefactor of a bridge program, knowing how daunting your first year can be, how overwhelming it could be to be sitting next to or, rooming with people who are far more prepared than you might be, to have an instructor in a position of power and authority care about you. And your numbers don't lie, right? The outcomes that you all have seen is a real testimony to how important that compassionate and empathetic leadership and mentorship can be on a university campus. So I think folks are going to learn a lot from what you all have put together in your Connections program. And we know that there are folks listening today who are going to dive into your chapter and pull out all the bits, but are also maybe going to be at an earlier stage in their program development, or maybe they're sort of halfway through a program. But I'd like for you all to share, as you have built and run and implement this program, and what you have learned, what do you think is important for program coordinators in terms of what are must-haves that they need to have for their programs?
Jen, go ahead and start.
Sure. Such a quick question. There's so many things that I'd say, oh, this is great. This is great. I think one thing that's really helped our program is an advisory committee that is made up of a lot of faculty from across campus, a lot of faculty that are heavily involved in various activities and in various levels of administration, as well as staff that are main really important stakeholders in our outcomes and in our programs, and having their voice there at the table and helping from the idea phase to helping to implement. It's really gotten that buy-in from lots of different offices and people across campus, and just their insight has been incredibly valuable and important. I'd say that's been one of the most important things that I've seen within our program.
Yeah, I would say, if you think about our program, we are a large public regional university, and we've managed to pull off providing faculty mentorship to roughly 75% of our incoming freshmen. And it's really it's an opt-in program. You might look at that on paper at first and say, that's impossible. You're not, So the first thing I think I would say is, moon landings are possible, right? And so what do you need? You need people who want to land on the moon. And so ambitious people who share values and get the right stakeholders, as Jen said, in the room, the people who share those values and the people who want to do something big. That to me is, you're not going to have any success without that. The right people in the room who share values and who want to do a big thing. And then after that, I think I would encourage folks to not worry too much about money, all of the kind of details. The first thing to do is work out your big idea. Have all the right stakeholders, have the right relationships around campus. All work at a university is people. It's people doing the work. So yeah, it's the right people in the room is the first thing that you need. From there, there's of course a million hurdles you have to jump over and challenges you have to overcome and things that you need to think about and all of the rest of it. But all of that, you can get through if you have the right stakeholders with the right values in the room to start.
It's also been really great to have, just one more thing, it's been really great to have people that can implement those big ideas as well. And I work with some wonderful, fantastic, knowledgeable, creative people, and sometimes we get those ideas and we we can implement them. We can make it actually happen, which I think sometimes we get stuck in that in higher education, and we're so committee based that these committees will come up with like these fascinating, wonderful, amazing ideas, but that just don't ever see the light of day.
Some of those right people in the room need to be decision makers. So, we have on our committee, I'm a vice provost. We have 2 associate deans. We have a number of people who are the kind of the AVP, assistant vice president level. Not all, then we have got faculty, right, and people that are out in the trenches doing the work. But yeah, you definitely need a few decision-making level people, or else, lots of times great ideas just wither instead of turning into an actual initiative.
Yeah, I love that. And we've heard that from other folks, that must-haves are this combination of buy-in from key stakeholders, their engagement with people that, as you've said, Harrison, who are ambitious and bold. And it sounds like you need this sort of combination of dreamers and doers, right? Because we need to make this all happen. And you sort of hinted at, but in terms of nice to have, what would you to categorize as things that are nice to have, but not a must-have?
I've loved being in this role as a faculty member. I think a lot of times the program coordinator or program director is in staff. And so I think it's been really valuable for me to be able to see both perspectives and to be able to navigate faculty concerns and issues, as well as kind of reconcile that with our program needs. And so that's been a really good thing, is just having that capacity to be able to implement and help see things through.
Yeah, I think I would actually call that not a nice to have, but a must have. Our program has been, first year experience programs are often split between student affairs and the academic side of the institution, and there aren't enough bridges between those 2 parts of the institution. We've been very effective at building those bridges. As a nice to have, I would say you must have big dreamers and big doers. But those big dreamers and big doers can get burned out, and it's not sustainable if they're just right, they're not supported. And they might still pull it off. They might still do the moon landing with, vacuum tubes and, a dream and a nickel and a dream and a prayer or whatever. But we've been fortunate to have, administrative support. So, like the connections director gets bought out of some of her time with her department, so that this isn't just kind of more work. There's a recognition that to make this sustainable, we need some administrative support. We need somebody else managing some logistics. We need, time from a variety of different offices and teams dedicated to this task, so that the task doesn't depend upon the heroic efforts of, 5 people. Probably still could pull it off with the heroic efforts of 5 people, but then it's not institutionalized, it's less sustainable, and it's something kind of inhumane about it at some point, right? That this kind of, these big initiatives happen, on this sort of backs of people who are willing to go above and beyond. So you can do it that way, but it's nice to build in the appropriate support so that it's sustainable.
Yeah, I love that, right? Because we do want these programs to be sustainable, right? And heroes are great, but heroes can get burned out, and then all that work is for naught when there's, nothing left, when ultimately the goal is about the students and not the program coordinator. So all that being said, what could you live without?
Well, we don't want to say that on a recording.
I know.
That's right. Well, you wouldn't be the first to be candid, so.
Oh, goodness.
What could we live without? I mean, I think that, well, one, I guess I would say this, and I'm not just saying this for the sake of the recording. We actually are, I think, a relatively lean operation, given how big the operation is. So in some ways, I don't know that we have an awful lot of luxuries in that sense. However, I mean, I think that we there are some, we have been over time more targeted about the kinds of trainings that we offer. And, there's some trainings, and we've sometimes frankly not gotten it right. Like, is this training a must have, or is this training a sort of nice to have? And sometimes we've missed the mark and we've made certain trainings optional. And now we've said, whoa, we actually need to make that mandatory again. But I do think when you're running a program like this, you're thinking about faculty who are, of course, themselves thinking about their time. And so, being clear about what's essential and what's not essential is important. And I think that there's probably some things we've learned over time. We don't actually have to make all faculty sit through that. We'll do that as an optional brown bag type lunch. So I think we have some of those kinds of things. Jen, have you brainstormed anything?
I was just thinking that on your comment, when you said we're a pretty lean program, I think that's true. And there's likely some things that other programs might. In fact, I was on a phone call with someone yesterday who was asking me if we had someone in-house that did some of our graphic design. And I kind of said, no, we don't. That's not something, we've done a lot of things ourselves. We've utilized help from students, student support, and others that are incredibly capable. But I mean, some of those things probably could have been done by other offices and probably done better in some ways for our graphic design, some things like that. But a lot of those things I think we already kind of do live without. And so
one of the reasons for that, and this is something I'd encourage anybody who's thinking about these kinds of things to have in mind, is no one program can solve every single challenge that every single student faces. And so we have been in the Connections program very deliberate about who we are and what we're for and what success would look like for us. And that means that, and being clear about that empowers us to say no to lots of units on campus who want FaceTime with the brand new students, right? And lots of times this happens with first year experiences, is everybody wants to turn the first year experience into everything for everybody. But it ends up in those cases being sort of nothing for nobody too often, right? And so one of the reasons we're lean actually is because we've been so single-mindedly focused on the academic mission of the institution, orienting students toward that, helping them understand its value, and then the kind of relationship side things of normalizing challenges, building a sense of belonging, and especially academic belonging, and brokering them to resources, so that we haven't created a lot of bloat because we've been so single-minded about who we are and what we're for. And I would encourage anybody who's thinking about, really, frankly, any kind of program of the institution, is to have that kind of single-mindedness. And it doesn't mean you're blind to the other wonderful things that need to happen around campus, but don't try to be everything to everybody.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you, Harrison. I think that is such a great sort of exclamation mark on such incredible wisdom and experience that you have all you've both shared here today. I'm excited for folks to read your case study and learn from the incredible work you've done at Connections. I want to thank you for that incredible work that you've done at Connections. I know the decades ago that I was a first year student, that those relationships and support that I got made all the difference for me, and making what was a daunting experience away from home something that felt accessible, and like, I can do this. And, now many years later, far in my career, I'm excited to know that there are programs that are really advancing those efforts. So thank you both so much for the incredible work you are doing, and for contributing that experience to this book and to this podcast. So thank you both.
Thank you. Thanks for having us today.
Yep, thank you. We're delighted to share it.
All right. Thank you, everyone. We look forward to seeing you in our next podcast.